us to send a video that we would play for the young men, and David would challenge them in some of these areas that I just shared with you, those values that meant so much to him. He couldn't be with us this year at Boys State, but he sent that video, and we played that video this summer. And we will be honoring him again this summer, I can guarantee. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but we are already making plans for that. Because you must understand that David embodied everything that Boys State represents. I'm blessed to be the father of 4 boys: Jacob, Caleb, Eli, and Micah. And one of the challenges in being a dad is raising your sons in a world like today, with the need for men to be men of character, integrity, and courage. You look for examples. They didn't have to look far when they saw David, because he embodied everything that a father would want in a son. Before Boys State, he was communicating with one of our senior staff members, Doug Bruni, and he closed out his email to Doug saying, "Doug, I wish I could be with you all this year. Always know that my heart is always with the program." Well, I can say this, that as a result of the life that he has lived and the role model that he has been for all of us, that the program's heart has been forever impacted through the legacy of David Hortman. On the back of your program, you'll notice a prayer. And before I share this prayer, I need to explain to you that one of the things that I loved about David, and I need to just to be honest with you, that I loved David. I loved that boy. He was the real deal. And I guess that's a southern phrase. You can say it and everybody kind of nods their head because they know what you mean when you say the real deal. But he was. You didn't have to wonder what was hiding back there. You could see it all over him. Watching him in action at Boys State was a precious thing because he never wasted a moment. He never wasted an opportunity to see young men and to go to them and to begin pouring into them and finding out what was going on in their world and then beginning to give them counsel. He seized every opportunity, and there was no question that for David Hortman, the number one thing in his life was his undying devotion to Jesus Christ. It was paramount. You could see it in the way that he talked, the way that he lived, the way that he served. He loved his family. And he loved this country. He really did. It wasn't just words. He really believed it. He believed in what this country stands for. And one of the things that as we pour into these young men, the last thing we do on the last day of Boys State, we've been talking about government and we're talking about politics and responsibility of the citizen and all those different values. But each week as a staff, as we watch these boys, in just the weirdest kind of way that I could ever explain, it's almost as if they become one of our boys. A son, if you will. And so on that last day, we read this prayer that Douglas MacArthur wrote for his son that he had not yet seen. And so today I would like to read this prayer because I know for David, this prayer meant so much to him and to all of us at Boys State. God answered this prayer. Through David, build me a son, O Lord, who will be strong enough to know when he is weak, and brave enough to face himself when he is afraid. One who will be proud and unbending in honest defeat, and humble and gentle in victory. Build me a son whose wishes will not take the place of deeds, a son who will know thee, and that to know himself is the foundation stone of knowledge. Lead him, I pray, not in the path of ease and comfort, but under the stress and spur of difficulties and challenge. Here let him learn to stand up in the storm. Here let him learn compassion for those who fail. Build me a son whose heart will be clear, whose goal will be high, a son who will master himself before he seeks to master other men, one who will reach into the future yet never forget the past. And after all these things are his, add, I pray, enough of a sense of humor so that he may always be serious yet never take himself too seriously. Give him humility so that he may always remember the simplicity of true greatness, the open mind of true wisdom, and the meekness of true strength. Then I, his father, will dare to whisper, I have not lived in vain. It is one of the greatest honors for us at Pamela Boys State. When I reflect on Philippians 1:3, I thank my God for every remembrance of David. For us, it's a great privilege to think of him as one of our sons.
Love one another, for love is of God. He who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God is love. Love bears all things, believes all things, love hopes all things, endures all things. God is love. 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 Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, all thy strength, all thy mind. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, for God is love. God is love. God is love. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy strength, all For God is love, God is love, God is love.
It is a privilege and a distinct honor to be with you today. I've spent most of the past week talking with people who knew Dave well, so the remarks that I make today are therefore a collaborative effort, and I want to thank the dozens of Dave's friends who have contributed. What has struck me most during this time is how many lives he touched and how profoundly he affected them. Everyone I have talked to related a tale not just of having known Dave, but of having been personally connected to him and deeply moved by that connection. Fate took him from us far too soon, but I want you all to know is that Dave led a good and giving, a blessed and blessing life. He packed more and better living into 3 decades than most of us will ever do, however long we might have on this earth. John David Hortman was an extraordinary man. One of the most important things I learned about Dave was that he loved his mother deeply. He loved his siblings too, and maintained an especially close relationship with Jill, as well as their close family friends, Stan and Pam Fields. Dave lost his father at an age when no one should have to face such a loss. He grew up much sooner than he should have had to do, but he met the challenge with faith, discipline, determination, and boundless good cheer. And later, when Brenda told him that she had found someone who made her happy, Dave didn't react with petulance or adolescent bravado. He welcomed Ken into the family as someone who would bring joy to his mother's life because he loved his mother. I had earlier learned a number of things about Dave. I met him on a West Point academic trip to the Normandy battlefields when he was a junior. My wife, Margaret, came along on that trip with 3 other faculty members, 2 spouses, 12 cadets, packed into 3 small vans. Now, Margaret says that I can be somewhat unapproachable. Don't you believe it? On the second day, she whispered to me that the slower cadets were riding in our van, inasmuch as the faster ones had already dived into the 2 others. On the third day, Dave was the first of the bunch to volunteer to ride with us, ever after endearing him to Margaret. He got in and immediately insisted upon putting some kind of headbanger CD into the stereo, which I thought interfered with the dignity of the trip. Margaret and David quickly overruled me, and my air of inapproachability suffered a fatal blow. When we got home, Margaret and I decided to adopt Dave and sponsor him as one of our own cadets. We had them over on weekends to watch football and to eat thousands of dollars of food at a sitting. However long they had been with us, these cadets still found me a bit formal, and God forbid that any of them should sit in my living room chair. Not Dave. He would plop down in my lazy boy with malice aforethought. And when I walked into the room, he would sit there flashing that trademark mischievous smile fairly daring me to say something. And of course, as a gracious host, I couldn't, and he knew it. Instead, I would offer him a drink, and he would cheerfully, nay, enthusiastically accept. And over time, our other cadets began referring to my throne as Dave's chair. They went so far as to warn me not to sit down lest Dave might want to sit there. Dave often found himself seated near our middle school-aged children, and what I found thoroughly unique about Dave was his total engagement with them. He could talk to my kids in a way that I could never fathom. He was totally immersed in their lives, and with no agenda at all, he became a mentor to them. They hung on his every word. They confided in him. Part of that was that Dave had blonde hair and penetrating blue eyes that mesmerized my daughter. I didn't have to warn him about that. Part of it was that he was a smart, athletic cadet who had made the transition from high school hero to hardworking rugby player, which mesmerized my son. For what it's worth, my son is now a junior at West Point and a hardworking rugby player himself, and that is no accident. Part of it was that the rugby team had an affinity for beer, and the commandant of cadets had disbanded the team after an unfortunate incident. I might add an international incident, but I won't go into details. Far be it from me to suggest here that Dave had anything to do with such shenanigans. Suffice it to say that Dave, having been restricted to post, found himself with a great deal of disposable time on his hands that he could spend with us and sit in my chair. We all gained from the exchange. Another thing that I have learned in this process and have begun to appreciate about Dave from talking to his friends was the depth of his humility. We all knew that he was a special man, but what we often didn't know about him was how many things he had done and how routinely he excelled at all of them. But he never felt the need to trumpet his own accomplishments. In high school, Dave was a cross-country runner, an accomplished actor, a student body president. As you've already heard, he was lieutenant governor at the Palmetto Boys State, went to Boys Nation, was named Secretary of State. Dave casually tossed off to me one time that he had gone to Boys State and that he still worked with the program. As a former Texas Boys Stater myself, I never knew how far he had gone and how much he had done. At West Point, he was a gifted student with a deep love for history. He joined the rugby team and became one of its standouts and its leaders. Dave was charismatic, but never flashy, smart, but never overbearing, accomplished, but always giving and humble and selfless. And when he graduated, Dave did me the immeasurable honor of asking me to swear him into the officer corps. We held the ceremony in the front yard of my West Point quarters, which he had visited so often. We should have done it with Dave sitting in my chair. Brenda and her family were there on that beautiful spring day that we have cherished ever since. Dave became an Army aviator and went to Fort Rucker for flight school. He was a diligent student who drove himself to master not only the technology but the art of flight. He became an outstanding pilot. And after graduation, he took a path that many of his peers could not, going to Fort Benning to become an Army Ranger. He not only passed the course and earned his Ranger tab, but as you have heard, won the Officer Leadership Award, one of the first aviators ever to do so. He reported to the 6th Cavalry at Fort Drum and quickly joined his unit already in theater in Iraq and became a platoon leader. And a handful of months later, when a vacancy opened in one of the cavalry troops, it was a foregone conclusion that Dave would be selected to command well ahead of his peers. In the words of his squadron commander, he hadn't been promoted to captain yet, but he was the right man for the job, and I gave it to him without reservation. Dave knew his assignment was temporary. The command was earmarked for a more senior officer later in the year, but you couldn't tell it by listening and watching Dave. He took the colors, walked to the podium with his chest puffed out and his Stetson cocked just right, and delivered the kind of remarks you'd expect to hear from an incoming battalion commander, not a first lieutenant. Poised and comfortable, he did what I came to expect of him in every endeavor thereafter. He graciously accepted the responsibility to lead and then went out and did it with vigor. Now, of course, in the Army, we have a tradition. The reward for a job well done is often another tough job to do. After his command, Dave's superiors gave him the most demanding staff assignments in the squadron, secure in the knowledge that whether in training or back for another tour in Iraq, they could count on Dave to accomplish any mission, no matter how complex or dangerous, and he always did. After that second tour, Dave returned to Fort Rucker for the captain's career course. He had charisma that drew people to him personally. You could learn a lot by Dave just by watching him smile. Mrs. Moss, his former teacher at Burns High School, said that his smile could light up the world. That former squadron commander says that while our loss is great, it is hard to be sad because every member conjures up that smile and his infectious laugh that made everyone around him gravitate to him. For my own part, I know that Dave had several versions of that smile. One of them was an impish grin that indicated that he was up to something, and he often was. Another was a smile of wonder about when things fascinated him. He was not afraid to show his curiosity, his love of learning, his admission that he didn't know something. One of his favorite words pronounced through that smile was awesome. And for Dave, it wasn't a cliche. And he had a tender smile when he was listening to kids, a smile not of condescension, but of real concentration, treating them like grown-ups and mentoring them. And the best of his repertoire was a smile of pure joy, a smile that gave everyone confidence, that made women fall in love with him, and that made soldiers want to follow him. Dave always pushed himself to be the best at anything he tried, in the cockpit, in the classroom, in the gym, wherever he was, Dave was giving it his all. He was a fitness fanatic. His peers at Fort Rucker wanted to be like him. They were not surprised when Dave was a distinguished graduate of the captain's course. Nor were they surprised when he applied for the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Now, some in the audience today may not know how elite the 160th, the Night Stalkers, are. Simply put, they are the elite of the elite, the creme de la creme, the best and most capable aviation regiment on the planet, and a national treasure. And most of the things that they do for this country, they cannot discuss with the likes of me and you. Dave and many of his colleagues spent several grueling months competing for the privilege and the honor and the sober responsibility of flying with the Night Stalkers. For 9 months, they went through the most arduous training of their careers, pushed to the limits with little rest. They often spent 20-hour days receiving a mission, planning, prepping, rehearsing, briefing, and executing, only to get another mission and do the cycle all over again, every day in a different environment: desert, over water, in the mountains, urban terrain. By this point in the story, you will not be surprised to learn that the commanders of the 160th felt that the hero of Inman, South Carolina, and Burns High School had turned in one of the finest sustained performances of planning, leadership, and flying that they had ever seen. They quickly and gratefully placed him in charge of an attack platoon. In that leadership role, Dave's talent, charisma, work ethic, and flying skill soon earned the respect of crusty pilots with thousands of flight hours and years of combat experience. One of those pilots was among the most senior chief warrant officers in the Army, with almost 30 years of flying time. He had a tradition of challenging new pilots. This warrant officer, who needs to be anonymous for the sake of security, but I'll call him Tom, would take one load of ammunition in his little bird and let the other officer upload 2. And they would fly to a special range and compete to see who could hit the most targets. And there was a wager. The bet is small, but it is symbolic. Whoever lost would take his bars off of his flight suit and present them to the winner. Literally, they were betting their bars. Tom has in his office what is renowned as the Wall of Shame, covered with rank insignia of scores of Night Stalkers harvested over years of single combat. Tom challenged Dave, and they flew out to the range. And when the dust settled, Tom graciously took off the insignia of a Chief Warrant Officer 5 and presented it to Dave. It was the first and only time in his career that he had ever done so. It is easy for those of us in the service to get wrapped up in our own worlds and to forget that this great nation continues to struggle and to thrive all around us. Yet when he was not deployed, as you've heard, Dave always went back to Boys State as a staff member and a counselor. Can you imagine being a junior in high school, attending Boys State, and seeing this radiant God King in front of you, smiling, buoyant, pointing toward your future? Dave was born with the gifts of talent and intellect, and through adversity and hardship, he cultivated the traits of hard work and selflessness and generosity. And the resulting compound yielded determination and charisma and mentorship. Dave made everyone around him better with friendship and loyalty, by setting the example, by creating a positive atmosphere. He made people better than they were. Boys Staters and cadets, soldiers and officers, aviators and rangers emulated him. He was a captain whom sergeants and warrant officers and colonels all wanted in their units. He was a pilot whom other pilots wanted to be their wingman. He was a man whom fathers hoped their daughters would bring home. And he was a man whom mothers hoped their sons would become. Let me not lose in this remembrance the overwhelming sense among his peers of what a giving and selfless teammate Dave was to his friends. They cheerfully acknowledged that in the competitive hierarchy of the Army, they were all vying for second place in any unit lucky enough to have him in its ranks. But they bear him no malice. For one and all, Dave was their leader, their helper, their champion, their brother. One of his colleagues said that to be with Dave was to be in the presence of greatness. I am a better man because of him, he said. And he will never die because we will always carry him with us in our hearts and minds. Dave even had that rarest of gifts. He could lead his leaders. One of his commanders said that Dave once told him that he was Dave's mentor. That made me smile, he said, because he didn't understand that it was I, not he, who gained more from our relationship. I've served 17 years in the U.S. Army, and I can honestly say that I have never seen anyone with more raw leadership talent than Dave. He was different than others around him, and he had no equal as a leader, as a teammate, or as a friend. People wanted to be near him, to please him, to be like him. He led by example in his every breath, and he was the best friend anyone could ask for. I may have been Dave's senior in rank, but Dave was my superior in everything that mattered. I love him, I will miss him, and I will endeavor to honor him by trying to be half the man he was every day. Now, in closing, on behalf of his leaders, his friends, his colleagues, his classmates, his soldiers, his community, his family, and especially his mother,